This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.
Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I'm your host, guiding you through cases that have moved through the courts and reached a conclusion, but have left the public divided. These are not your typical cut and dried cases. These are the ones where the facts may be clear, but the truth? Well, that's another story. Now imagine this. You're a teenager at the mall. You're flipping through clothes with your friends when a charming man approaches. He's well-dressed, confident, and offers an opportunity too good to pass up, a chance to model for a professional photographer. But what happens next is beyond your worst nightmare. What would you do if that man was not just a photographer, but a predator, luring you into a deadly trap? That's the nightmare Christopher Wilder created for his victims. Known as the Beauty Queen Killer, Wilder's crime spree in the spring of '84 shocked the nation. Over 6 weeks, he kidnapped, tortured, and murdered at least 8 young women across multiple states. But what makes this case even more chilling is Wilder's double life. A wealthy, successful businessman and a race car enthusiast, living the American dream on the surface, while hiding a dark and dangerous side. One of his most well-known victims, Tina Marie Rosico, survived a harrowing ordeal. Abducted, assaulted, and forced to assist in his twisted schemes, Tina later became a key figure in understanding Wilder's methods and motives. But her role in luring other victims left many asking, was she simply surviving, or did Wilder manipulate her into complicity? This case raises profound questions. How does someone like Christopher Wilder, seemingly normal, even charming, live such a dual existence? How is it even possible? Was his behavior rooted in psychological illness, or was it cold, calculated evil? And perhaps most haunting, how...
This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist. Because we're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.
Could society overlook the signs of his escalating violence for so long? Stick with me here as we unpack the twisted tale of the Beauty Queen Killer. By the end of this episode, you will have the chance to decide, was this a case of madness, badness, or a tragic combination of both? For 6 weeks in 1984, Christopher Wilder traveled across the United States, leaving a trail of terror in his wake. Starting in Florida, he worked his way through Texas, California, Nevada, and beyond, using a single chilling method. He approached young women, often in malls or public places, posing as a photographer or talent scout, with promises of modeling fame. He lured them into isolated situations where the real horror began. Wilder's victims were young and bright and trusting. They thought they were chasing their dreams, only to face his dark reality. Once he gained their trust, Wilder revealed his true intentions, which were abduction, torture, and often murder. What made his actions even more terrifying was the way he maintained his charm and composure, even when committing unspeakable acts. This wasn't just about physical violence. Wilder's tactics were psychological as well, breaking his victims mentally and emotionally. One of the most notable survivors, Tina Marie Rosico, endured 9 days of captivity, forced to travel with him and lure other victims. Tina's survival strategy raises questions about agency, manipulation, and trauma. Wilder's double life only deepens the mystery. On one hand, he was a wealthy contractor and race car enthusiast, known for his charm and his good looks. On the other hand, he had a history of violent sexual offenses, dating back to his teenage years in Australia. Authorities later discovered that his criminal behavior had escalated for decades, but his outward success kept suspicion at bay. The case also raises societal questions. How did Wilder evade justice for so long? What role did his privilege and charisma play in shielding him from scrutiny? And how do we as a society reconcile the image of a successful businessman with the reality of a violent predator? By the time
This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist, because we're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.
law enforcement caught up with Wilder in Colebrook, New Hampshire, his spree had come to a dramatic end. In the final confrontation with police, Wilder was shot and killed, taking any chance of a courtroom trial with him. But his death didn't close the book on this case. The trauma he left behind, especially for survivors like Tina, continues to haunt those who lived through it. And so today we ask, was Wilder's behavior the result of an uncontrollable madness? Or was it the calculated evil of a man who thrived on manipulation and power? When Christopher Wilder was finally stopped in April of '84, the sheer scale of his crimes shocked the nation. He wasn't just a murderer, he was a manipulator, a predator, and to many, the embodiment of evil. But as the details of his life and crimes came to light, a question began to form. Was this man driven by madness, or was his cruelty simply a reflection of who he was at his core? Let's take a closer look at what happened. Wilder's reign of terror began long before his 6-week killing spree. Born in Sydney, Australia in 1945, Wilder's early years were marked by troubling signs of violence. At 17, he was involved in a gang rape and received a sentence of probation. Even after undergoing electroshock therapy, he continued to escalate his violent tendencies. By the time he moved to the United States, Wilder had built a successful career in real estate, amassing wealth and cultivating an image of charm and sophistication. But behind closed doors, he was anything but ordinary. Police would later uncover evidence of sexual assaults and other crimes that Wilder had managed to hide for years. It wasn't until his spree in '84 that his mask of normalcy began to slip. Over those 6 weeks, Wilder abducted, tortured, and killed at least 8 women, though some believe the true number may be higher. He would often approach his victims in public places, offering modeling opportunities and building trust before trapping them. His methods were calculated, and his ability to manipulate not only his victims, but also those around him speaks to a chilling level of control. But Wilder's crimes weren't just about violence. They were about domination. He didn't see his victims as people. They were objects to be used, controlled, and discarded. For survivors like Tina, the trauma wasn't just physical. It was deeply psychological. Forced to assist Wilder in luring other victims, Tina's ordeal raises questions about survival and complicity. So here's the dilemma. Was Christopher Wilder's behavior the result of a psychological illness that spiraled out of control? Or was he simply evil, someone who reveled in power and violence? And more importantly, does it even matter? Whether mad or bad, the devastation he caused remains the same. Christopher Wilder's crime spree was not just about taking lives. This whole thing was about the calculated destruction of trust, hope, and innocence. Each of his victims had a story, a life full of promise that he cruelly cut short. And yet his methods were so brazen, so public, that it's almost unthinkable how long he was able to operate without being stopped. And let's talk about the victims. Over 6 weeks, Wilder traveled across 9 states, leaving a trail of destruction and devastation. His targets were young women, most in their late teens or early 20s. Some were aspiring models, drawn in by the promises of fame and fortune. Others were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, like 21-year-old Terry Ferguson, who was abducted from a Florida mall parking lot, and 17-year-old Dawnette Wilt, who Wilder shot and left for dead after days of captivity. Dawnette miraculously survived and provided crucial information to law enforcement. Then there was Tina, a 16-year-old who became one of the most controversial figures in this case. Wilder abducted her in California and held her captive for 9 days. And during this time, Tina was repeatedly assaulted and forced to assist in luring other victims. Many have debated whether Tina's compliance was a survival strategy or whether Wilder manipulated her into becoming an unwilling accomplice. For Tina, it was a matter of life and death, a decision no one should ever have to make.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. BetterHelp recently surveyed over 16,000 people and found that while 75% of people believe it's wise to seek support, only 27% of Americans are in therapy, and people stay silent to avoid being judged. BetterHelp has over 10 years of experience matching you with the right therapist, because we're all better with help. Visit betterhelp.com/stopthestigma for their first ever State of Stigma report, the latest in mental health research.
As Wilder's spree continued, the manhunt intensified. Law enforcement agencies across the country scrambled to track his movements, but Wilder seemed to stay, always, one step ahead. This is like Bundy all over again. We didn't hear about this in the news, though, too much, did we? I mean, it wasn't until New Hampshire, until this guy's luck ran out. In a dramatic confrontation at a gas station, nonetheless, Wilder attempted to flee but was shot and killed in a struggle with police. His death brought his spree to an abrupt end, but it left behind a lot of questions, more questions than answers. And so here is where we're left. How does someone like Christopher Wilder live such a double life for so long? Was his outward charm a mask for a deeply disturbed mind? Or was it simply a tool he used to manipulate and destroy? And when someone like Wilder dies without facing justice in a courtroom, does society ever truly find closure? Christopher Wilder's crimes didn't emerge from nowhere. They were the culmination of a lifetime of escalating violence, all hidden in plain sight. To understand how he became one of the most prolific serial killers of his time, we have to go back to the beginning. Wilder was born in Sydney, Australia in 1945. His early years showed troubling signs of instability, and at just 17, he ends up convicted of participating in that gang rape and sentenced to probation. Now, despite his early conviction, Wilder avoided significant consequences and was even subjected to electroshock therapy, a controversial treatment that at that time was thought to address sexual deviance. Whether his treatment had any lasting impact on Wilder is unclear, but it certainly did not stop his escalating behavior. By the late 60s, Wilder had relocated to the U.S., settling in Florida, and there he built a successful real estate business. and cultivated a lavish lifestyle. To the world outside, Wilder was the picture of success, wealthy and charming and well-connected. But behind closed doors, he was a predator. Over the years, Wilder was suspected of numerous sexual assaults, though most of these crimes went unpunished due to lack of evidence or victims unwilling to testify. In February of '84, Wilder's violence exploded into a full-fledged killing spree. Starting in Florida, he abducted his first known victim, 20-year-old Rosario Gonzalez, from a Miami beauty pageant. Rosario was never seen again, and just weeks later, another young woman, Elizabeth Kenyon, went missing under eerily similar circumstances. Both women had been approached by Wilder under the guise of a professional opportunity. And then from there, his spree escalated. He crisscrossed the country, abducting women from malls and parking lots and rest stops. Each time he used the same method, posing as a photographer, offering his victims the chance to model, and luring them into his car. Once they were isolated, Wilder's charm gave way to unspeakable brutality. But Wilder's tactics weren't limited to physical violence. He used psychological manipulation to break his victims, stripping away their sense of autonomy. Survivors like Dawnette and Tina have described how Wilder's control extended beyond physical force, making escape seem impossible. As Christopher Wilder's spree progressed, his methods became more brazen, and his trail of victims grew. By mid-March '84, Wilder had moved beyond Florida, targeting women in Georgia, Texas, and Oklahoma. Each abduction followed a similar pattern. He approached young women in public spaces, promising them modeling opportunities, and used their trust to lure them into captivity. One of the victims, Terry Ferguson, who I've mentioned, was abducted from an Indiana mall parking lot. She was later found dead, her body dumped in a wooden area. In another horrifying case, Wilder kidnapped 17-year-old Dawnette. That was in New York. And after holding her captive for days and subjecting her to unimaginable abuse, he shot her and left her for dead on the side of the road. Miraculously, Dawnette survives and is able to provide critical information to law enforcement, and this helps them piece together Wilder's movements at the time. Wilder's crimes weren't confined to physical violence. Now, his ability to manipulate his victims, it was just terrifying. This was especially evident in the case of Tina, who became both a victim and an unwitting participant in Wilder's spree. Tina, abducted in Torrance, California, was forced to accompany Wilder in his cross-country rampage, using her to lure other young women into his clutches. Tina's survival strategy, though controversial, did ultimately save her life. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies across the country were scrambling to track Wilder's movements. The FBI issued a nationwide alert, and his face appeared on wanted posters and television broadcasts. 10 most wanted men. But Wilder was careful, changing cars frequently and using his wealth to stay a step ahead. But the manhunt came to a head in April of the same year, '84, when Wilder was spotted at a gas station in Colebrook, New Hampshire. A confrontation ensued, and in the chaos, Wilder was fatally shot. His death marked the end of his killing spree, but for many, it meant a lack of closure. With Wilder dead, the full extent of his crimes would never be known, and many questions about his motivations and psyche remain unanswered. For the survivors and families of his victims, Wilder's death was a relief, but it did not erase the trauma he left behind. Christopher Wilder's death in New Hampshire marked the end of a harrowing chapter in American criminal history. But for investigators and survivors and the public, this case left a lingering sense of unease. How had a man so deeply violent and predatory operated undetected for so long? And how did his charm and success exactly shield him from scrutiny? Wilder's double life was key to his ability to evade capture. To those who knew him superficially, he was a wealthy real estate developer and an amateur race car driver with the taste for luxury. He owned speedboats and high-end cars, expensive homes, projecting the image of a self-made man. But under the surface, he was a predator who had honed his skills in manipulation and control over decades. His victims' trust was not accidental. It was the result of years of calculated charm. In the aftermath of Wilder's killing spree, law enforcement uncovered evidence suggesting his crimes spanned far beyond those 6 weeks of terror back in '84. Investigators linked him to unresolved murders and disappearances in Florida and Australia, raising questions about just how many lives he had taken. Despite his death, Wilder's case became a catalyst for changes in how law enforcement agencies shared information across jurisdictions, paving the way for modern databases and communication systems. Because even during Bundy had figured out they could not track him across state lines and things. And so this was a major advance because now criminals can drive or run thousands of miles, but at the end of the day, the authorities can still be tracking someone. But Wilder's case also forced society to confront some uncomfortable truths. How does someone so outwardly successful conceal such darkness? How are they able to do this? How do psychological factors like narcissism and psychopathy enable predators to thrive in plain sight? And perhaps most disturbingly, how does privilege, financial, social, or otherwise, allow people like Wilder to avoid consequences for so long? For survivors like Tina, life after Wilder meant grappling with public scrutiny and deep personal trauma. Her role in helping Wilder lure other victims has sparked intense debate. Was she complicit, or simply trying to survive? Experts in trauma have pointed out that Tina's actions likely stemmed from fear and manipulation, a testament to Wilder's ability to dominate, not just physically, but psychologically. Ultimately, Chris Wilder's case is a chilling reminder of how appearances can deceive and how evil often hides in plain sight. And it challenges us to consider whether justice can ever truly be served when someone like Wilder escapes a courtroom verdict by dying before he's held accountable. Even decades after Christopher Wilder's death, the impact of his crimes continues to resonate. His case stands as an example of how systemic failures and societal blind spots can allow predators to thrive. Wilder's ability to exploit trust and manipulate perceptions, as well as use his privilege to evade justice, speaks to deeper issues on how society identifies and responds to danger. For law enforcement, Wilder's spree was a wake-up call. At the time, coordination between agencies across states was limited, slowing the manhunt. The patchwork nature of communication allowed Wilder to move freely for weeks, leaving devastation in his path. In response, efforts were made to improve interagency collaboration, including the implementation of centralized databases for tracking serial offenders. While these systems have undoubtedly saved lives, Wilder's case reminds us of how much damage can be done in the absence of such tools. For survivors like Dawnette and Tina, life after Wilder meant navigating both the trauma he inflicted and the public's often judgmental gaze. Tina, in particular, faced scrutiny for her role in Wilder's crimes. Critics questioned her actions, suggesting she had choices she did not make. But trauma experts and advocates have since emphasized that survivors in captivity often comply with their captors as a means of staying alive. Tina's story highlights the psychological complexity of survival under extreme duress. If you're driving in a car with someone who is holding you captive and they stop and take you into a restaurant and tell you to do something, what are you going to do? Should we judge Tina for listening to her captor's demands? How do we automatically assume that she is complicit? isn't she just doing what she can to survive? Well, not everyone thought so. And then there were others left in the wake. For the families of Wilder's victims, they had a different kind of pain. For them, Wilder's death meant an end to his killing spree, but not an end to their questions. Without a trial, they were denied the chance to see justice served in a courtroom. The lack of definitive answers about Wilder's motivations and the full scope of his crimes left many struggling to find closure. Wilder's case also holds a grim place in true crime discussions. His charm and success contrasted with his predatory behavior, making him a very chilling example of how easily evil can hide behind a mask of normalcy. And it forces us to take a look at what's going on when we're talking about trust and privilege and the human capacity for manipulation. As we move forward here, we're going to explore the deeper questions. What drove Wilder to commit such horrific acts? And how do we balance the need for justice with reality of an evil that defies explanation? When discussing Christopher Wilder's case, there's one question that dominates. Was he mad or was he bad? To answer that, we need to examine the evidence and arguments from both sides. So let's start with the argument that Wilder's actions were calculated and deliberate. This makes him not mad, but entirely bad. Law enforcement and psychologists who reviewed his case noted that Wilder demonstrated a high level of planning and control. He didn't act impulsively. He carefully selected his victims, using sophisticated tactics to gain their trust, and went to great lengths to cover his tracks. For instance, Wilder frequently changed cars during his spree and traveled across multiple states to help evade capture, indicating a clear understanding of how to avoid detection. Moreover, Wilder's ability to maintain a successful business and a charming public persona suggests he was fully aware of his actions. He used his wealth and charisma to manipulate not just his victims, but those around him who never suspected the dark side of his life. For many, this level of control and deception points to a deeply manipulative individual, driven by power and a lack of empathy, but not by mental illness. There are others, though, that argue Wilder's actions were rooted in psychological disturbance, suggesting that he was indeed mad. Wilder's story supports this claim. As a teenager, he underwent electroshock therapy following a sexual assault conviction. While this treatment was primitive and controversial, it may indicate that Wilder exhibited disturbing behavior from an early age. Some experts have suggested that Wilder's actions align with traits of psychopathy or other severe personality disorders, which could explain his lack of empathy and violent tendencies. But still, others question, mad or bad, are they mutually exclusive? Wilder's behavior could be seen as a combination of both, a deeply disturbed individual whose mental illness fueled his evil acts. His manipulation of Tina, for example, this required not just charm and calculation, but also a profound understanding of human vulnerability. So, was this an inherent skill of a manipulative predator, or the manifestation of a disordered mind? Ultimately, the arguments surrounding Wilder's motivations reflect a broader societal debate. How do we distinguish between madness and malice? And does it even matter when the outcome is the same? Lives destroyed, trust shattered, and questions left unanswered? The case against Christopher Wilder as inherently bad gains even more weight when you consider the precision of his actions. He didn't just lash out in fits of uncontrollable rage. He meticulously planned his attacks, adapting his methods to maximize his control over victims. For example, Wilder carried a murder kit. It had handcuffs and duct tape and other tools, allowing him to act quickly and effectively once he had isolated his victims. These calculated steps suggest a mind not overtaken by madness, but driven by cold, premeditated cruelty. Supporters of the bad argument also point to Wilder's use of manipulation as a weapon. His charm was a tool he wielded expertly, making it difficult for victims to see the danger until it was too late. Even for survivors like Tina, described how persuasive and convincing Wilder could be. This ability to manipulate wasn't the result of a mental breakdown. This was a conscious choice to exploit others for his own gratification. But then you do have the mad argument, and that focuses on Wilder's psychological profile. Experts who studied his behavior noted traits consistent with psychopathy, a disorder characterized by a lack of empathy, superficial charm, and a tendency to view others as objects. Psychopaths often operate with a distorted sense of reality, driven by a need for dominance and control. Was Wilder's violence a manifestation of this disorder, pushing him beyond the boundaries of moral behavior? Additionally, some argue that Wilder's early life played a role in shaping his criminal tendencies. His exposure to violence, coupled with his history of sexual offenses as a teenager, could suggest a pattern of escalating behavior tied to psychological trauma or an inability to regulate impulses. While this doesn't excuse his actions, it raises the question of whether mental illness played a larger role than previously acknowledged. The public's perception further complicates the discussion. Wilder's outward success and charm made him an unlikely suspect for people to consider, and this speaks loudly to how society often conflates outward appearances with moral character. Happens all the time. Could the same traits that enabled Wilder to thrive in business also be linked to his predatory behavior? And if so, does this blur the line between madness and malice? I mean, ultimately, we have to look at whether he was mad or bad or both. The devastation he caused remains undeniable, but understanding his motives might provide insight into preventing similar horrors in the future. Christopher Wilder's case remains one of the most controversial in true crime history, largely because of the questions it raises about society's perceptions of evil and justice. And again, we are back to perceptions. But Wilder's ability to operate undetected for so long, his treatment of survivors, and the public's divided reactions, they all continue. It's a debate still. One of the most polarizing aspects of Wilder's crimes is the role of his survivor, Tina. For 9 days, she was both a victim and a reluctant participant in Wilder's spree. But critics questioned her compliance in helping Wilder lure other victims. But experts argue that she was doing what she had to do to survive. This debate exposes the public's struggle to understand trauma and the psychological dynamics of captivity. Was Tina a victim of Wilder's manipulation, or could she have acted differently? The public remains split. I want to know what the public feels like she could have done in the situation. We run across this so often. Well, they did it. Why didn't they run? Why didn't they say no? But if the fear is inside of you that if you do not do what they say, they will kill you because they have said that, and they've already raped you, held a knife to you, beat you, stuck you in a box, I don't know, all the things that they love to do, are you just going to stand up to them and say, no, I'm not going to do that? Or are you finally afraid enough that you'll do anything to stay alive? It's very hard for people hearing these stories that aren't in these situations to feel like they could just get out. This has been an ongoing debate since forever. People that are victims that end up helping their perpetrator, the question always comes up, well, did they want to do it in the end? You know, at the end of the day, we have to look at who they were before this, and would they have wanted to do this in the end? Was Tina already this way? She was not. She was a 16-year-old girl who was hanging out with her friends and thought she could be a model. And now she's being held captive, and the public wants to know why she didn't do more about it. It's just a question and something to think about, since the public is still split on this whole decision. And then, of course, you have the media. They always play a role, and did in this as well. And at the time of all this, headlines emphasized how successful and good-looking he was. And they referred to him as the charming millionaire even. And this framing inadvertently downplayed the severity of his actions and focused more on his double life than the pain that he caused. And for many, this represents a failure of media accountability, as sensationalism often overshadowed the voices of victims and their families. But by now, we know that media does this. They pick and choose what they want so that you will watch them. That's all they care about. And then finally, there is that lingering question of justice. Wilder's death in a shootout with police meant he never faced a trial, and this robbed survivors and victims' families of any legal resolution. Some believed his death was enough, but others argued that it left a lot of unanswered questions. Without a trial, no one would ever know the scope of Wilder's crimes or the depths of his motives. In the end, Wilder's case leaves us with a haunting question. How do we define the line between madness and malice? Was he a product of psychological disorder, incapable of controlling his impulses? Or was he a calculated predator whose choice to commit heinous crimes was actually a choice? He did it because he could. Now, does this even matter, though, when in the end the devastation he caused is the same? For survivors like Tina, the trauma did not end when Wilder was killed. Her story highlights the complexities of survival and the public's tendency to judge from the outside, even survivors. Could any of us say with certainty how we'd react in her shoes? And what about the families of Wilder's victims? For them, the lack of a trial meant unanswered questions and a justice system that felt incomplete. Wilder's double life, a successful businessman by day and a predator by night. This forces us to confront the unsettling reality that evil can hide in plain sight. He wasn't a shadowy figure lurking in the dark. He was the kind of person people trusted and even admired and envied. And that's what makes this case so chilling. So what do you think? Was Wilder's behavior the result of deep-seated psychological issues? Or was it the calculated evil of a man who thrived on control and destruction? And does society bear some responsibility for allowing someone like Wilder to operate unchecked for so long? Think about it. And thank you for joining me in True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. Stay safe out there, guys. Stay curious, ask the difficult questions. And until next time, this is Alexis Knight.